Hi everyone, I'm John Kindervag, Field CTO of Palo Alto Networks and the creator of Zero Trust. And I'm here today to talk to you about how Zero Trust should be the strategic foundation of your network transformation. So we're going to be talking about Zero Trust as the strategic approach to stopping data breaches. Now, when we look at cyber security and cyber war, right? We can see that there's four levels of strategy or strategic engagement that we use when we do this. And so the first level of strategic engagement is called grand strategy. This is the ultimate goal that any entity is trying to achieve. Grand strategy is done at the highest level of any organization. So in nation states, it's done by the president or the prime minister. In a company, it's done by the CEO and the board of directors. Then the next level down is called strategy. Strategy is, of course, the big idea that you're going to use to execute on that ultimate goal. And so strategy is done at the next layer down in any organization. So strategy bridges the gap between tactics, which are the things you use, and operations, the way you use them. Now, I had a mentor early on in my career who was a real expert in strategy, and he's the one who taught me this four levels of strategic engagement. And what he explained to me is that almost everyone confuses strategy and tactics. So now it turns out that we can map this four levels of strategic engagement to the cyber war that we're all in. So now the grand strategy of all cybersecurity must be to stop data breaches. Now, this is sometimes fairly controversial when I talk to people about it because if I'm talking to a person whose job is mostly tactical, they go, oh, data breaches, that's not really affecting me. I'm worried about keeping the network up and running. But if you're a person who lives in the strategic or grand strategic level of your organization, this is what you care about. Data is, of course, the new oil, and it fuels economies. It fuels businesses, the fuel for the engine of our economy. And breach is something that we think about in an old school term, and if we're been in cybersecurity very long, we think of a breach as somebody got into our internal network. They breached the castle wall, they got into the castle, they've captured the flag, oh no, the world is over. But all compliance and regulatory initiatives define breach from a legal perspective as when data that is sensitive or regulated has been exfiltrated from our networks or systems into the hands of malicious actors. So all cybersecurity at a grand strategic level is worried about data exfiltration, and I'll explain why that is so important here in a moment. And then if you want to do this, your strategy must become Zero Trust. And Zero Trust was designed to be strategically resonant to the highest levels of any organization, yet be tactically implementable using commercially available off-the-shelf technology by people with our traditional skill sets. And so I'm going to be explaining to you how you're going to do this, but Zero Trust bridges that gap between grand strategy and tactics. And then we have tactics, that's the tools and technologies that we use, and operations, those are the platforms and the policies, the way in which we use them. All four of these things must come together both up and down if we're going to really achieve value in our cybersecurity efforts. So let's talk about stopping data breaches here real quick. So why do I say stopping data breaches is the grand strategy of all cybersecurity? Well, it's because of the Target data breach. In December of 2013, there was a big data breach called Target, right? And most of you have heard of that probably. 110 million records were stolen, which doesn't seem like very much in the modern world, but it was quite devastating at the time. But this is really day zero of cybersecurity. Everything prior to that is what I call BT, or before Target. We're now in the year 6 AT, or 6 after Target. Target was the most important event in the history of cybersecurity. Why? Because for the first time in history, the CEO of a major organization was fired by something that IT did or didn't do, which was, of course, allow a data breach. And in fact, the only thing that can get a CEO fired that IT can do is allow a data breach. CEOs don't get fired for ransomware attacks and phishing scams. They fire people, but they don't get fired. That's why stopping data breaches is grand strategic. Now, let's go back to zero trust. And zero trust comes from the understanding that trust, this human emotion that we've injected into digital systems for really absolutely no reason, is the fundamental problem that we have in all of IT and cybersecurity today, because trust is actually a dangerous vulnerability. What do you do with vulnerabilities? You mitigate them, don't you? And trust must be mitigated because it is actually also its own exploit. It is the only vulnerability that is also an exploit. Malicious actors don't have to create a new tool to exploit trust. They don't have to have some piece of malware that they package up. It's an exploit automatically because they just have to be on your network. And as a former penetration tester, I can tell you they always can get on your network. It's about keeping them away from those toxic, sensitive, regulated data sets that will get your CEO fired if they're exfiltrated. So the only entity in your organization today that gets value from trust are the malicious actors who are going to exploit them. Think about that. It doesn't provide you any value at all. Zero trust becomes the strategy because it identifies and eliminates that broken trust model, which is the fundamental problem, and it resonates up to the grand strategic actors in your organization. And so what happens is we see this old trust model where there was an untrusted side of the network that went to the evil internet, and the trusted side of the network that went to your internal network where all your wonderful people live and work. And then we see that occasionally bad things can come from the evil internet and they can get onto your network, right? So, what if a packet gets onto your network? Well, you, because of this broken trust model, are automatically going to elevate its privileges and give that packet attributes of trust. Now, what's a packet? A packet is a collection of zeros and ones as represented by electrons or photons. So if I can get my electron on your piece of Cat6 cable, if it's on the other side of that invisible boundary that we call the trust boundary, then you're going to elevate my privileges and give me attributes of trust? That's insane. And then we have malicious actors, people like Manning and Snowden. You've heard of those big breaches. They were trusted users on trusted devices. They had true multi-factor authentication, much better than you can buy for yourself. They had the right patch level and the right antivirus on their devices. And so the problem with Manning and Snowden was no one looked at the packets being generated by their devices post-authentication. This is why zero trust is not about identity. It consumes identity. Zero trust is about looking at the packets being generated by devices and applying layer 7 policy to those packets to make sure that they don't misuse or abuse the data or the assets they have access to. So we eliminate in zero trust the concept of trust at all. It's not useful, so let's get rid of it. No more trusted users, no more trusted packets, no more trusted devices, no more trusted interfaces. People will complain to me, "Oh, John, you're saying people aren't trustworthy." And I'm not saying that. I'm saying something much more profound. I'm saying people are not packets. No person has ever been on a network. We have this anthropomorphization of the network where we say John is on the network. I've never been on a network in my life. I've never shrunk it down into a subatomic particle where I've been transferred via radio frequency to a wireless access point where I've been sent down the public internet. That hasn't happened to me. It rarely happens in the movies, maybe Tron or Lawnmower Man, but even in the Matrix, they got to plug in. So people aren't packets. We're looking at packets and making this layer 7 policy decisions based upon what that packet is supposed to be doing. That's all. So we're not saying people aren't trustworthy, we're saying people are not packets, and we're decoupling the concept of the user from the device. They're two separate entities. Zero trust is very simple. There's only 9 things that you need to know to deploy and engineer and maintain zero trust environments, whether they're on-premise or in a public cloud, private cloud, or on an endpoint. It doesn't matter. Only 9 things. I've made it very simple. So the first 4 things are the design concepts. And the design concepts look like this. The first thing we do is we focus on the business outcomes. We get with business leadership and ask, what are you trying to achieve? You see, typically we gave people a network. We said, hey, here's your network. We built it for you. And the business said, that's great. You've given me a bunch of round holes, but I have square pegs. And we say, well, you better start whittling. You have to make your environment fit with what I've already built. And that's not the right answer. So every zero trust network is bespoke for each business purpose. And we do that by designing the network from the inside out instead of the outside in. We learned to design networks from the outside in. We started at the edge, the internet connection or the network connection, and moved inward. And then we said to the business, plug in wherever you'd like. And now GDPR says, hey, we have to know where all of our data and assets are, and we don't know that because we didn't design from the inside out. See, we need to start with the data or assets we're protecting and design outward from there. And the third thing we do is determine who or what needs to have access. Need to know, least privilege. Neither Snowden nor Manning needed to have access to most of the data they stole in order to get their job done. That's a super important thing to remember. But while we are controlling access, we need to inspect and log that access in real time all the way up at layer 7 so that we can control what's going on. Now, is that traffic clean? Is there malware embedded in an attachment that's being uploaded to one of our assets? We need to know those things. And we do those things automatically in PAN operating system in policy. That's why I came over here to grow Zero Trust, because of this amazing technology stack that my customers were choosing over and over again when I was at Forrester Research, the place where I developed Zero Trust. So the best way that I found to visually articulate what we're trying to do is to show you how the U.S. Secret Service protects the President of the United States. This is an image from President Barack Obama's 2009 inauguration parade. And the Secret Service knows 3 things about the President of the United States that we don't know about the data or assets we're protecting. First, they know who the President is. They don't do presidential discovery projects. They don't say, hey, can you get me a tool so I can scan and find the President? Secondly, they know where the President is at all times, right? They don't go, oh, have you seen the President lately? We've lost track of him. No, that doesn't happen. And then finally, they know who should have access to the President at any given time. These are the 3 questions we should be asking about the data or the assets that we're protecting. So we can see here that there was a perimeter on this day, but if you look at all of these uniformed Secret Service agents, you can see their hands are in their pockets. They've got hats on their heads. Why? Because it's cold outside. And they know that they're not the real entity protecting the President, right? They're just there to have a little bit of security theater, to take away the low-hanging fruit. So you can see down here at the bottom, the Secret Service has defined a protect surface. The protect surface is the first fundamental tactical concept in Zero Trust. So we can take the overall attack surface, which is on this day is probably all of Washington, D.C., and shrink it down into something that is very small and very knowable. On this day, there were 4 people in the protect surface, the President and his wife and his 2 children. At the end of the day, if those 4 people are safe and secure, the Secret Service did their job. And so by creating a protect surface, they can do something really amazing. They can move their controls in adjacent to the protect surface. They don't have their controls on the borders of Mexico and Canada. That's the perimeter. That's how we would do it. They put their controls adjacent to the protect surface. This is a key concept here, is making your controls adjacent to the protect surface. And by doing this, you can define a microperimeter in policy. And this microperimeter has a very small policy set. So typically we see a 7 to 10 times reduction in policy when we deploy zero trust. So on this day, in January of 2009, there are only 2 people who can transit outbound the microperimeter at this time. Those are those 2 Secret Service agents who are driving that vehicle. I don't know why they would, but they could, because they're not part of the protect surface. And then there are exactly 0 people who can transit inbound of that microperimeter at this moment. And so there would have to be a policy update before anybody who could get inside of that microperimeter. And the Secret Service doesn't just stop there. They continuously monitor and update this in real time. So if they see new threats, or if somebody needs to get in the vehicle, they can send all that information over to the controls and update that policy in real time. This is a zero trust model of executive protection, and it is the best visual metaphor that I've come up with so far, at least, to show you what we're trying to do in your environment, in your public clouds, private clouds, on-premise, or endpoints. Let's go look at the tools and techniques, right? So there are 5 steps to building a zero trust environment. Remember, I said you only needed to know 9 things, the 4 design principles and the 5 steps. So the 5 steps look like this. Step 1, we need to define the protect surface. What do we need to protect? So the answer is we need to protect what's known as a DAS element. We take a single DAS element and we put it into a single protect surface to start with. Now, sorry to give you another AAS. That's just how it turned out, but I couldn't really call it a SAD element, could I? So it's called a DAS element to help you understand what we need to protect. So we need to protect data. There's 4 data types we typically need to protect. I call them the 4 P's of data security: PCI, PHI, PII, and IP. And then we have applications we need to protect. Those might be ERP, CRM, or HR applications. And then there's assets. And an asset can be pretty much anything, right? You've heard about IoT, Internet of Things, all of the plethora of things that are coming into your network. But it could be mobile devices. It could be things that your partners use. It could be a cloud that you use. It could be pretty much anything. So this landscape is shifting so much, you need to be able to automate it and bring that into this zero trust policy in a way that meets the dynamic nature of how you're doing your digital network transformation today. Any device that can connect to the network is an asset, and we can find that and put it into a protect surface. And then there's services we need to protect. Important things that our network runs on, such as Active Directory. And of course, we have layer 7 technologies that help you get visibility into your protect surface so that you can actually see what's going on. Now, the second step is mapping the transaction flows. How does the system work together? We have to understand that before we can architect it. And again, the layer 7 visibility of our integrated product suites help you get visibility there. And then we architect the network. Because these are bespoke or tailor-made for your environment, we have to know what we're protecting first. And so we have a lot of great technology that helps you do this. And then the 4th step is we create the policy. This is where it all comes together. Ultimately, zero trust is a layer 7 policy statement. I just need layer 7 technology to be able to apply and enforce that policy. That's why it's so important to use this type of integrated product environment. And so we have great technologies that help you get policy and write policy in ways that no one could ever do before. And then finally, we monitor and maintain the network. We send all the telemetry from the zero trust environment into our big data lake where we do machine learning and artificial intelligence types of things to it to see how we can refine and update these 5 steps over time. And we do this dynamically and automatically, and that's what's so exciting about this whole thing. Now, hey, we're in a time of incredible uncertainty, and a lot of people are having to work from home for the first time. And at the same time, you're hearing VPNs are dead. So how do I deal with all this stuff? Well, the VPN is not dead. We just need better VPNs. And so let's look at why it's important that you use a VPN for your remote workers during this particular crisis. Let's look at why VPNs are so important during this time of crisis. So as traffic travels across the internet, it's unencrypted by default. I mean, there's times when it might be in an encrypted session, but generally you have to put it there. The internet itself is not encrypted and protected. So if we have a malicious actor who comes in, they can come in and attack the traffic and get access to the traffic and see what's going on, either by looking at the traffic as it goes across the internet or some other network, or by attacking the endpoint and getting visibility through the endpoint. The first VPNs were set up to provide encrypted tunnels so that the attacker could no longer get access to the traffic as it traverses the internet, so they couldn't sniff the traffic. But we need modern VPNs, what are sometimes called zero trust network access, to be able to provide layer 7 policy at the endpoint level so that we can reject the ability of the attacker to have access to the traffic, even if they have access to the endpoint. So we have layer 7 policy. In our Prisma access technology, we have unified policy that is a layer 7 control that exists at that endpoint. So we're controlling at layer 7 what traffic can get to resources across that VPN. This is by default a zero trust model of remote network connectivity. Now we get into the operations, the final step. So this is an image of the Bomba, an analog computer built by Alan Turing to automate the cracking of the Nazi Enigma code. It was in the movie The Imitation Game. And in that movie, there's a scene where everybody wants to tear this machine down because they want to do things manually. They want to use paper, pencils, and people, the 3 Ps of cryptoanalysis of the day. And Alan Turing says something really, really important in this movie, really profound. He said, "What if only a machine can defeat another machine?" This is so important. We have to build machines, and that's what we're doing at Palo Alto Networks. We're building a big machine to defeat the machine called our adversary. Now, how do you do zero trust? Well, there's a thing called the zero trust learning curve. It's important to understand that we look at zero trust along 2 axes, the sensitivity and criticality of the protect surface and the time on the zero trust journey. So early on in this learning curve, what we can do is we can start working on low sensitivity assets that won't break our network, our company, if something goes wrong. So we give people the ability to learn how to do zero trust. Once they've learned the basics of it, they need the ability to practice. You get to zero trust the same way you get to Carnegie Hall, practice, practice, practice. That happens very early on in the process, by the way, so that we can quickly move on to protecting our high-value assets, our crown jewels. I used to believe when I first started this that we started with the crown jewels, but I found they're too fragile and often people don't know how they work, so there's too high of a risk of something going wrong. We don't want that to happen. We want those critical assets to always be up and running, so that's why we need to learn how to do it. And then over time, we'll focus on things that are less important. These things are often termed secondary and tertiary protect surfaces, and we'll eventually end up where we've run out of things that we really need to protect. That we'll look at something and we'll go, that's not sensitive enough to put in a zero trust environment. We just want to let it go however it's already protected because we want people to have it. Additionally, we've given you a capability maturity model so you can track your zero trust journey based upon each individual protect surface. So again, it's mapped to those 5 steps and it uses the 5 levels of a traditional CMM model: initial, repeatable, defined, managed, and optimized. So you do this on a per protect surface basis, and now you have a tool that you can message up to the CEO on your trajectory. How are you doing in this particular data set or this particular asset on getting it really protected in a zero trust environment? So the next steps, what do you need to do? Well, the first thing you do is build a zero trust center for excellence for that data or that application that you're trying to protect, that particular DAS element. Bring in business leaders, IT people, lots of people involved in that decision, because it can't just be the cybersecurity folks. Next, get engaged in a zero trust workshop. We have teams of people who will help you do this, spend a day with you, help you know how to get started. And then leverage our professional services team. We have a global professional services team to help us deploy and manage zero trust environments worldwide. Well, I want to thank you for your time today. Everybody stay safe, and until next time, goodbye.